The article I chose is How to Get Your Kids to Listen. Hint, it is not yelling. This is for multitasking moms and dads. When I read the article, the first line in it says, I used to blame the Legos. I can immediately relate to this because my son is obsessed with Lego. I believe that any parent would agree it is a very rare occurrence for your children to actually complete a task when you ask them to do it the first time. It just doesn't happen. So she explains in her article that she usually starts her request very nice. It's please clean your room, please get dressed, please let the dog out, things like that. When the compliance is not achieved, the requests are repeated more than once. Happens. By the time you're asked them 3 to 4 times to do one simple thing, you're raising your voice, your tone changes into something more like, how many times do I need to ask? I'm not telling you again. Things like that. I've been there. Finally, you're so frustrated to the end that you're yelling, screaming, making threats. It's not a good situation for anyone. As a parent, I can totally relate to this frustration. I have been in this situation more times than I care to admit, fortunately. So listening by a parent definition is do what I ask you to do the first time I ask. Pretty simple if you're an adult, not so much for children. So what she does is she's reading all kinds of articles, trying to get some answers, doesn't find any real solutions. But she comes to the realization that you just can't yell at a 4 or 6-year-old and expect to get the response that an adult would give you, per se. She does come across some helpful tips during her research. So she mentions a Dr. William Seals that recommends not yelling from another room. So enter the room instead where your children are and make your request, and then join them in the activity for a couple of minutes. This lets the child know that you are serious and it's not optional. She also mentions a lady by the name of Stephanie Leeds, a former childhood education director, and she recommends making eye contact when you're making a request with your child. She also calls out for a parenting magazine, an article that's saying barking orders from another room is not always the best way to get your kids to listen. So then she goes on to explain her kids' perspective on the matter. So they say, it's not fair. We're expected to do things now. And when we ask mom for something, the answer is always in a minute. Any parent can relate to this as well. Kids will always question your authority. They will be quick to call the kettle black. So her defense is, first of all, now is subjective because she's usually already asked them 5 or 6 times to do the task. Second, she's usually doing something productive, chores of some sort maybe. And third, that their request is not usually imperative. It's usually, come see what I've built. But she says that she does recognize and understand their point of view and how they interpret it. So to be successful, we must work with them instead of yelling at them. Clinical psychologist Laura Markham explains that kids will go into fight or flight mode when they feel unsafe. Yelling will activate this response. So for this to make their listening successful, you can't yell or it could be entirely lost. All right, so here are some tips from the expert that help the parents communicate and stop the yelling. Get their attention. You could do things like clap. You could whisper, like you're saying something secretive. Have them repeat what you've told them. So that way you know that they understand your request. Talk less. Minimize your words. Use short phrases. You could even leave short notes if they can read. Give them choices. Let them choose the order in which they complete the task that you've given them. Routine. Knowing what is expected will reduce that need for you to keep repeating yourself. Model good behaviors. Act in the way that you want your children to act. Don't punish. So by that we mean explain consequences in advance for noncompliance. So If they already know what the punishment will be, then if they still choose not to follow through, it's on them. But if you're going to set a consequence, you have to follow through. If you don't follow through, they're going to know for the next time, oh, mom didn't punish me anyways. And then lastly, they say acknowledge feelings. So help them identify and name the emotions that they're having. That way, they're going to be less likely to fight your directions. Ultimately, we all want to be heard. Children are no different. We must find ways that we can reach them, that they can relate to and understand. So for verbal judo techniques, I think relate a lot to this article. One of the things that came to mind was the 11 things that you should never say to anyone. And I've got 5 of them called out that I know I've probably used speaking with my kids and it didn't work. So one of them being, come here. Usually they know they're in trouble at that point because those are the rules. Kind of a cop out. You never or you always. Yeah, you never listen. I'm not going to say this again. We all know that's not true. And I'm doing this for your own good. None of these phrases serve your purpose and don't use them. The 5-step hard style also came to mind. Ask, set context, present the options, confirm, and then act. So, if they already know the consequences of not complying with what you've asked, then you've got to make that action and say, well, this is your set punishment. You already knew the consequences. So next time, maybe you will listen. I think this sequence would come in really helpful when trying to get your kids to comply with your request. A couple of crucial conversations techniques also kind of came into mind for me as far as start with a heart and active listening techniques. I think both of those would be useful when you're trying to have a conversation. Questions for my classmates. I think maybe some of my classmates might be a little too young to have kids of their own yet. So it may be hard to relate to this article per se. So I'll try to phrase these maybe a little differently. Have you ever experienced someone who just would not do what you've asked? Did you try to change your approach to see if there would be a different outcome? And what has worked for you? How were you able to get through to someone that simply would not listen when you've asked repeatedly for their compliance? So thank you for listening.